Session 6, Julian and Ecological Consciousness. What is the ecological challenge? We are children of the Industrial Revolution, of the Enlightenment, of settled arable communities who learned how to adapt the environment to our needs, rather than adapt our needs to the environment. We are used to thinking of our environment as something outside of us, to be arranged to our liking, so as to produce what we need and want, when we want it. We are used to being in charge in the West. The mindset that underlies this attitude towards the environment can be characterized as buffered, a concept from historian Charles Taylor, and Gestell, a concept from philosopher Martin Heidegger. I will come back to Gestell in a moment. Taylor argues that the buffered self emerged in the West over the 5 centuries from 1500 to 2000, the period that includes the Reformation, the Enlightenment, and the Industrial Revolution. The buffered self sees herself as hermetically sealed off from others, needing to create relationship as 1 + 1 + 1, rather than a porous self who is inherently in relationship, who knows I am because you are. Gestell is a mindset which puts nature into what Heidegger calls standing reserve, there waiting to be used, with no inherent value, only that which humans confer upon it. The harm done by the buffered Gestell mindset might have been limited when there weren't so many of us, and we had not much technological power. Now we are vast in number, all looking to the environment to give us what we want, when we want it. And our technological power gives us the impression that we can make that happen. As the environmental historian J. McNeill has described so vividly and comprehensively, humanity has succeeded in affecting and changing every sphere of the planet, the atmosphere with greenhouse gases, the hydrosphere with dams and pollution, the lithosphere with mining, the pedosphere with farming, and the biosphere with our rogue species status, such that other species only survive if they can adapt to the human presence, for example, rats and viruses, or if we have need of them, for example, cattle and wheat. But our apparent lordship of creation is an illusion. Heidegger argues that technology, far from serving humanity's needs, is now the dominant force determining our futures. Technology is lord of creation. The problem is not technology itself, mind, but the technological mindset that puts it in charge. This, I suggest, is the ecological challenge. These forces of relentless control and technological manipulation are why our planet is now betraying its fragility and roaring in pain. It is the buffered Gestell mindset that has brought this tragedy about. And as with all tragedies, it is the character of the protagonist that determines the outcome of the story. Our Gestell characters will not, of themselves, change anything. Only if we transform is there any hope of the story changing. But we are enslaved, says Heidegger, buffered, says Taylor, deluded rogue lords of the universe, says McNeill. Julian can help us. Her own subjectivity, her own self, was transformed by her revelations, not least because she was open to being transformed before they began. And the text she produced, because of its nature, can act on us like her revelations acted on her. Her text can in turn transform our subjectivity if we are open to it. She does it by waking us up into an active, performative response. She does not mount a theological argument with which we can agree or disagree. She offers a poetic text, as philosopher theologian Paul Ricoeur would put it. A poetic text that awakens and transforms by the poetic power of its language. But the challenge is that in order to let it do so, we have to come to her text as disciples, not as critics. We come to her text to learn, as supplicants knowing our need. In so doing, like Julian, we have already opened ourselves to the possibility of transformation. Coming to a text, coming to anything for that matter, as a disciple, does not conform with the subjectivity we have inherited. So my entreaty is to come to Julian as disciples, not masters of her text, and learn from her. And it is no minor request. I am asking us to be open to a new way of being and seeing that might, just might, provide an escape route from slavery to Gestalt and the possibility of our learning how to live with the earth and not harm it. Julian's way of seeing her visions is not buffered, not Gestalt, but porous, responsive, interactive, above all, open to her vision's transformative power. And she writes of her experience in such a way that even today, hundreds of years later, her words offer the same direct, face-to-face encounter with her visions that can transform us. So we can talk about that. But I have also picked just a couple of passages from Julian, which I think are particularly indicative of this porosity. The sort of encounter that's transformative, and it doesn't have to be with Julian, but Julian is one way, Julian's text is one way. It's one that is participative. So you don't have a sense of something over there which you measure and make sense of and maybe use in some way and give value to if it's useful to you. It's an encounter where you can feel something rising in you to respond, to participate. As Julian participates in her visions, and we can participate in her text, as when you're having a conversation with somebody and something lights up in you and you find that you can call it a joint project. The conversation is a joint project, not just one person speaking and then the other person waiting to speak and then speaking and then this person waiting to speak. You know those conversations where you're not really listening to each other and you're not changing your position, you're just thinking, well, I want to give my position here. So the transformative conversation is the one where you join together in a joint attempt, let's say, to discover the truth or discover more depth of the subject in the subject that you're under discussion. So the encounter is participative and it's porous. It's porous in that the visions, let's say, call that out of us, call that porosity out of us. They don't quite make sense unless we are porous to them. Because, as I say, they're not things with which you can agree or disagree. She simply describes what she saw. And so you either receive them porously or you don't, but you can't really analyze them. So you come to the encounter with the intention of being porous, or open to them. And then that makes it possible for the encounter to increase your porosity. And in so doing, the possibility of a change in subjectivity of yourself is there. And that's the transformation that I believe the ecological crisis needs in us. We need to change the character of the protagonists, and that's us. And all these, frankly, brilliant technological solutions that are being come up with, they are brilliant. But if they're applied with that same buffered Gestell mindset of sorting out the environment, getting it under control, make it carry on doing what we've always asked it to do, or asked it to do for the last few hundred years, we won't succeed. It won't work. This isn't a question of success or failure. This is a question of coming to it as a transformed self. And then the technological solutions or responses might be appropriate, but they're applied in service and connection with the earth, not as something that once again we're rogue lords doing to the earth. And that's why I think Julian is so brilliant and so needed today. It's not really so much what she says as the way she says it. It's her way that can teach us. So let's just pause there and see if there are questions or comments or anything on what I've just said.
Would you mind just defining again what the Gestell is?
Yes, Gestell. So it's quite hard to render in English, and there are different in the translations of Heidegger. There are different renderings. So one of the words that's used is enframed. It's where you're, and he talks about it being both a skeleton and a bookcase. So it's both your interior and also the bookcase by which you organise the world. Those are not particularly helpful for me to say. It's the mindset. He also calls it a technological mindset. And I don't know if you've read Laudato Si, this wonderful encyclical by Pope Francis, and it was published in 2005. He also talks about the technological mindset. And it is the mindset that places everything in standing reserve, waiting to be used. Perhaps that's the simplest way to think of it. Technological mindset that places everything out there, waiting to be used, with no value except the value upon which we confer upon it. And what Heidegger says is that we do that to nature. So he says, take a hydroelectric dam. That will produce electricity consistently. Created a dam, he talks about the hydroelectric dam on the Rhine. You've dammed the Rhine, and that means we have electricity all the time, consistently. We've made the river in standing reserve. He says, and contrast that to a windmill, which turns just when the wind turns. And it doesn't change the wind in the way that the dam changes the river. And it means that we just have the energy when the wind blows, not in this fixed, reliable way. And he says the effect of that kind of way of treating nature, turning it into something that's productive for humans, is that humans too become in standing reserve. So we then serve that bit of tech, because we have to keep it going, to keep it maintained. And the humans who are maintaining that bit of technology are like the bits and pieces in the technology itself. So humans too get treated as standing reserve. And before we know it, we're all in that position. Look at the way we serve our phones. Look at the way we serve the economy. And of course, it's the poorer and the weaker who tend to be in that position. So that feeling of mastery is just really held by a few. And look at the control through colonialism of lands and also peoples. The ability to turn a whole people into standing reserve, there to serve the empire, there to plant the crops that are wanted for the empire, not that are needed for the local community. So it's a mindset, technological mindset. He talks about it in something called an essay concerning technology. Interestingly, Heidegger was a Nazi. When Nazism rose to power in Germany, he was an academic and he sympathized, and he was made principal of Freiburg University. And he is really vilified for that, rightly. A sympathizer should have known better. Of course, one doesn't know how one would respond in those circumstances and how brave one would be. But that's what he did. This essay concerning technology was written much later, about 1951. It's one of 4 lectures which he turned into essays. And I do wonder whether it was reflecting on what happened in Germany and the way he reacted to it, condoned it, collaborated with it, that made him think about this way in which we can treat each other, control and turn people into units of production. It's a brilliant essay.
We're going along very happily with this idea of liberosity and, our willingness to change. But some would argue, with a lot of validity, I think, that one of the successes of climate change denies the powers that be is this ability to make us as little individuals feel responsible for the climate crisis. We're all made to feel really guilty and we must do our own little whatever. But actually, it's changing the real power.
It's systemic.
How does that come about from our individual change?
Well, yes, it's a great question. And there is a myth, I think. It's a kind of hero's myth that if we can just get to that person who's in power, tell them what they need to hear, the world will be all right again. When I worked for the Archbishop's Council, I used to get letters from people saying, tell the Archbishop to do X, whatever this thing was. It was either medical ethics or environmental ethics. Tell him. And there was just such a sense of, make him see. He's the one who's got to see. I'm just a, poor, pathetic something. But it's not untrue. It's really not without validity, as you say. But in a democracy, actually doesn't belong to church, but it relates to it. But in democracy, our politicians can only move with public opinion. And the truth is that this isn't something that they think is a vote winner. If it was a vote winner, they would do it, believe me, particularly in the year coming up to an election. And so, it's such a challenge because we are just one vote. And it does seem as though there are so few who would really make that demand of their politicians. But we have to know that we're part of that. And can we perhaps get a sense of what it might be to not be a buffered self, to not think of ourselves as a separated individual, of a cause as being 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 + 1, and that exhausting thought of we just don't have the numbers. But if there is that sense of porosity to the other, of relationality to the other, that if we have the courage to change, to let ourselves be transformed, that doesn't stop at the edge of our skin. And it isn't something that you then fight with the next person in that conversation, which is, I'm going to speak, and then you're going to speak, and then I'm going to speak, and then you're going to speak. But offers the possibility of something transformative that then has its own power. We haven't really seen that. Well, maybe we have. Maybe we have seen it in other examples. I mean, slavery, it just became, when slavery was normal, we really believed, so it was in the 18th century, we really, really, really believed that the economy depended on it. We couldn't see how the economy could run without it. And then one day being a stretched out time, it understood to be simply wrong, and we were simply going to have to find another way of doing it. We just were. And it's something like that. But none of us can do this alone. And there isn't a hero who's going to do this for us. And I think a lot of prayer is involved.
There are lots of occasions in history where collective thought has changed. I mean, go back 150 years and small boys were climbing chimneys to sweep them.
Yeah.
Until somebody stood up and said it was wrong. People worked 14-hour days, 6 days, 7 days a week. Until somebody, and people came together and with the very simple notion of this is not right. Mm-hmm. And it did work.
It did change.
It did change. We need that kind of groundswell of movement again.
It's the artists that get us started, though, if you think about it. Think of Charles Dickens telling those really compelling stories, shocking stories. And the poetic text, the compelling story. Yes. Yes. So I chose them because they call us into a performative response. So the first one. In this, he showed a little thing, the quantity of a hazelnut, in the palm of my hand, and it was as round as a ball. I looked thereupon with eye of my understanding and thought, what may this be? And it was generally answered thus, it is all that is made. I marvelled how it might last, for methought it might suddenly have fallen to naught for littleness. And I was answered in my understanding, it lasteth and ever shall, for God loveth it. And so all thing hath their being by the love of God. And then the second passage. The mother may give her child to suck her milk, but our precious mother Jesus, he may feed us with himself, and doeth so full courteously and full tenderly with the blessed sacrament that is precious food of very life. The mother may lean the child tenderly to her breast, but our tender mother Jesus, he may homely lead us into his blessed breast, by his sweet open side, giving the same understanding in this sweet word where he saith, Lo, how I love thee. So do you get that image? It's a little bit convoluted, but so the mother gives suck to the child. Jesus, his mother, gives us food with the Eucharist, his body and his blood. But he also invites us through the piercing in his side at the crucifixion to enter to actually enter into his body. And she describes finding a great space there, enough for everybody. And where he says, "Lo, how I love thee." He invites us actually into himself. He's a very physical, visceral, tactile images. Do you imagine Julian entering in and hearing him say, "Lo, how I love thee"? We can maybe feel the call to porosity in these two passages. Mark's gospel doesn't have a resurrection account. There's something tacked on by a later redactor, but the Greek that we have that stops at chapter 16, verse 8, with the women who find the empty tomb, and the angel, or whoever is in the tomb, says to them, "He's not here. Go and tell the disciples they have to go to Galilee." And I've always really liked that, because what it says to me is, if you want to see the resurrected Christ, you have to go to Galilee. Whatever that means. So the reflection is, what does that mean? What does it mean to go to Galilee? What does it mean to go to Galilee? How do I go to Galilee? That's what I mean. You have to go there. Can't work it out in your head. And the weird, work it out in our heads.
So the passages invite us to be porous. You said that here?
Well, because so take the first one, it's not something happening over there. It's on the palm of her hand. It's right here. She looks at it. There it is, the whole of creation in the palm of her hand. It's a tiny, fragile thing. So that's even better than Earthrise, the wonderful photograph that changed our image of the Earth. It's a beautiful green and blue planet that was taken from space. That's even better than that. It's right here, so close. And the understanding that it's love that holds it. So she feels it, it's here, it's absolutely participative. And then the being fed by Christ and being invited into his side. Again, it's not over there. It's not a theory. It's sort of revolting. But supposing we entered Christ, in our imaginations, entered Christ's side, where would we find ourselves? Like that. So an invitation to participate in the visions rather than just read them. And that's my thesis, if you like, that in so doing, we open ourselves to the possibility of being transformed in ways we cannot anticipate. And it's only by the participation that the experience becomes possible, that the transformation becomes possible. But like any great poetry or great art, or great story, you're drawn into it. You can't keep away from it. It's compelling. It confounds you. It goes beyond your comprehension. It makes you bigger, makes you grow. Like that.